I only whispered it. Then the alien girl turned and purred, "Careful, human." I can hear everything. Mark had always known that diplomacy could be unpredictable. As a seasoned human ambassador, he had navigated countless negotiations across the stars, but nothing quite prepared him for the Zelnari. These beings were ancient, intelligent, and held secrets that humanity had only begun to scratch the surface of. But now, as he stepped onto the lush, otherworldly terrain of Zelnara, a planet whose green skies and shimmering lakes seemed almost surreal, he felt a mixture of awe and uncertainty. He was about to meet the beings who would either become humanity's greatest allies or their most dangerous foes. Mark's ship touched down with a soft hum on the landing pad, the metallic groan of its engines settling into silence. As he disembarked, he took a deep breath, the air rich with unfamiliar scents, something between jasmine and an earthy musk. There was a slight buzz in the atmosphere, as if the entire planet was alive with energy, aware of the significance of this moment. He was escorted to the palace grounds, where the Zelnari held court, their towering citadel glinting like a jewel against the horizon. The architecture was unlike anything he had ever seen, curved structures that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built, with bioluminescent veins running through them like the pulse of the planet itself. Mark couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of it all, even though his mind was focused on the task ahead. Inside the palace, the walls shimmered with iridescence, and delicate musical notes floated through the air as if the very atmosphere was designed to calm and soothe. Mark walked through the halls with his head held high, aware of the eyes watching him from every corner. The Zelnari were known for their extraordinary senses, and he was already feeling their scrutiny. Their eyes, silver and glowing faintly, seemed to pierce right through him. He had been briefed on their abilities, heightened senses of smell, sight, and hearing, far superior to anything humans could comprehend. Some had even claimed that their abilities could extend into telepathy, but no one really knew for sure. Finally, he was led to a large chamber at the heart of the palace. At the center stood a woman. No, not just a woman, but a representative of the Zelnari people. Mark had seen her only in recordings before, but now, standing before him, she was more imposing than he had imagined. Liara, the Zelnari diplomat, was young by their standards, but already had an air of authority about her. Her tall, slender frame was wrapped in a robe that seemed to shimmer like liquid silver, with long, dark hair flowing behind her like a cloak of stars. But what struck Mark most were her eyes, deep silver pools that seemed to hold an infinite amount of knowledge, and perhaps even something more, something dangerous. Mark extended his hand in greeting, but she didn't take it. Instead, she studied him for a long moment, her gaze penetrating. He could feel the weight of her stare as if she were assessing him, weighing his every thought. "Ambassador Mark," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, like a soft breeze caressing his ears. "It is an honor to meet you. I trust your journey was pleasant." He nodded, unsure how to respond. Her tone was polite, but there was something in the way she spoke that made him uneasy. She was not like other diplomats he had met. She wasn't trying to charm him with pleasantries or formalities. She was sizing him up, as though she already knew exactly who he was. "It was," he said finally, his voice steady, though his mind raced. "Thank you for the warm welcome. I hope this meeting will be the beginning of a long and prosperous relationship between our peoples." Liara's lips curved into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. She motioned for him to sit, and they both took their places across from each other at a table that seemed to float in midair. The room around them buzzed with an almost electric hum, as if the entire palace was alive with anticipation. Mark could feel the weight of their shared history pressing down on him. The history of humanity's first tentative steps into the galactic community, and the Zelnari's centuries of isolation, watching from the shadows. As they began their discussion, Mark was struck by how quickly Liara picked up on the slightest shifts in his tone and body language. He would pause before answering a question, and she would immediately press for more details, her eyes never leaving his face. It was as if she could hear the thoughts that lay just beneath his words. His training told him to be careful, but it was difficult to know how to keep his thoughts in check. The Zelnari were known for their keen senses, but Mark didn't expect them to be this sharp. Every question he answered seemed to prompt another, more probing one, and soon Mark found himself feeling strangely exposed, as though Liara was peering right into his soul. But it wasn't until later that night, when they were alone in a quiet corner of the palace gardens, that things began to take a turn he hadn't anticipated. They had taken a break from the discussions, and Mark found himself standing in the middle of a breathtaking courtyard, the moonlight reflecting off the shimmering waters of a nearby lake. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers, their petals glowing faintly in the dark. He turned to Liara, who was standing just a few feet away, watching the stars above. For a moment, Mark forgot about the weight of the mission and simply allowed himself to marvel at the beauty of the scene. But the silence was unsettling, and he muttered to himself without thinking. "I can't believe how strange this all feels," Mark said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't meant to be heard, just a fleeting thought, a moment of vulnerability. But then, without warning, Liara turned her head sharply, her silver eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. She smiled again, but this time it was different. There was something predatory about it. "Careful, human," she purred. "I can hear everything." Mark froze, a chill running down his spine. He hadn't realized she was so close, hadn't noticed her movements at all. The way she had turned so quickly and silently was both graceful and unnerving. He felt exposed, like she had peeled away every layer of his being with a single glance. Her words hung in the air between them, the weight of her meaning sinking in. She hadn't just heard his words, she had felt his thoughts. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? There was no denying the truth of her statement. Mark had underestimated the Zelnari, and now he realized that the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Liara stepped closer, her movements fluid and silent, like a shadow gliding through the air. She was so close now that he could feel the warmth of her presence, the subtle hum of her energy. Her voice, when she spoke again, was almost a whisper, but it felt like it was right inside his mind. "Careful, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "You never know who might be listening or who might be watching." Mark swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had just whispered a passing thought, something he hadn't meant for anyone to hear. But Liara had heard it all. And now he couldn't shake the feeling that she was listening to every word, every thought, and perhaps even more than that. In that moment, Mark realized that this was more than just a diplomatic mission. This was a game of minds, a battle of wills, and in this game he was playing against someone who could hear everything. Mark couldn't shake the feeling of unease as he walked back to his quarters that night. Liara's words echoed in his mind, each repetition of "I can hear everything" taking on a new weight. He had always known that diplomacy in the stars could be a delicate game, but this was something different. He had dealt with alien cultures before, but none had ever made him feel so exposed, so vulnerable. It wasn't just her alien beauty or her poise that unnerved him. It was the way she saw through him, the way her senses could cut through his thoughts like a knife. The next day, Mark met with Liara again in the council hall. The Zelnari had an impressive structure for meetings, all fluid and open, with walls that shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the faces of those who sat in the room. He took his seat at the long, oval table, which seemed to hover just above the floor, the edges glowing faintly. The air was thick with tension. Liara's presence was commanding, but Mark wasn't the only one who noticed the underlying tension in the room. The Zelnari were whispering, exchanging subtle glances that seemed to shift with every word he spoke. He had to remind himself that the stakes were high, far higher than he could ever have imagined when he first set foot on this planet. He caught Liara's eye across the room. She smiled at him, but it wasn't the warm kind of smile he'd hoped for. It was the kind of smile that said she knew something he didn't. A smile that made his skin crawl with the realization that she was always watching, always listening. It wasn't until later, in a private meeting, that Mark began to realize the full extent of Liara's abilities. He had arrived early, as he usually did, to prepare for the day's negotiations. Liara was already seated when he entered, her back to him as she gazed out at the view of the shimmering lake beyond the palace. There was an air of calm around her, as though she was in complete control of everything. Her long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders like an ink-black river, and her eyes, those haunting silver eyes, glowed faintly, even in the soft light of the room. "Ambassador," she said, her voice cool and controlled. "You look troubled." Mark took a deep breath and settled into the chair opposite her. "I'm fine, just thinking." Liara didn't turn to face him, but there was an almost knowing quality to her voice. "It's more than that. You've been tense since our last conversation." You're wondering what you've gotten yourself into, aren't you? Mark's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't said a word about his unease to anyone, yet here she was, speaking as if she could hear the very thoughts running through his mind. He tried to push down the feeling of panic creeping up on him, but it was hard. Liara's abilities were beyond anything he had encountered before, and the more he learned about her, the more he realized how little he understood. I'm just not sure I'm prepared for this, Mark admitted, his voice quiet. You're not like the other diplomats I've met. You see things that no one else can. I can feel it. I don't know how to navigate this. Liara finally turned to face him, her silver eyes piercing into his. There was no hint of judgment in her expression, just calm understanding. It was as if she had been waiting for him to say something like this. Mark, she said softly, I've been watching you, listening to you if you will. And I know you're trying to figure out how to approach us, how to speak our language, but you need to understand something. Our people have been isolated for so long that we no longer rely on mere words. We hear what others don't say. We understand what's left unspoken. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. She wasn't talking about simple telepathy. She was talking about something much deeper, something that went beyond words entirely. A skill that allowed her to hear the thoughts, the emotions, the very essence of those around her. So you can hear everything? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Liara smiled, but it wasn't the playful smile from before. It was something darker, something more dangerous. Yes, but not just words, Mark. I can hear your heart race when you're nervous. I can feel the tension in your muscles when you're afraid. I know when you're lying, even when you don't say a word. Mark was quiet for a long moment. It was hard to wrap his mind around the implications of what she was saying. The Zelnari had abilities far beyond human comprehension, and Liara was just one of them. What did that mean for the negotiations? For humanity's place in this vast, unknown galaxy? I didn't think you were lying, Liara continued, her voice taking on a softer tone. But I do think you're afraid, and I think you're right to be. This mission isn't just about diplomacy, it's about trust, and trust is something I know you're struggling with. Mark swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. The truth was, he didn't know who he could trust. The Zelnari were an enigma, and Liara was at the center of it all. He wasn't sure if he should admire her for her intelligence or fear her for the same reason. She wasn't just a diplomat. She was a force to be reckoned with, and the sooner he accepted that, the better. What are you trying to tell me, Liara? He asked, his voice low. I'm telling you that trust isn't something we can build overnight, she said, her gaze never leaving his. It's something we'll have to earn, but you have to understand that I'm listening always. And that can be both a gift and a curse. It depends on how you use it. Mark felt his chest tighten as the weight of her words settled in. She wasn't just a skilled diplomat, she was a walking, talking lie detector. She knew things about him that no one else could. And if he wasn't careful, she could use that against him. So what now? He asked, his voice tight. How do we move forward with this? Liara's expression softened, but her eyes still glowed with that unsettling light. We move forward with caution, we move forward with respect. And we move forward with the understanding that this isn't just about politics or strategy, it's about people. And you're right to feel afraid, Mark, but you're also right to feel hopeful. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their conversation hanging between them. Mark didn't know what to think anymore. He had come to this planet with the goal of forging a lasting peace between humanity and the Zelnari, but now it felt as though he was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring down into a vast, unknown void. Liara's voice broke the silence. I know what you're thinking. You're wondering how much of yourself you can give to this mission, but the truth is you can only give what you're willing to, and the question is, how much of yourself are you willing to risk? Mark didn't have an answer for her, not yet. As he left the room, Mark felt the weight of her words settling in. He had never faced a situation like this before. The Zelnari were unlike any species he had encountered, and Liara was more than just a diplomat. She was a force, an enigma, a being with abilities that made him feel small and insignificant in comparison. And he knew, deep down, that this mission wasn't just about peace. It was about something far bigger, something that could change everything. The days passed in a haze for Mark. Each meeting, each conversation with Liara felt like another layer of the complex web he was tangled in. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was different. The more time he spent with Liara, the more he realized that his understanding of diplomacy and even the universe was limited. The Zelnari weren't just an advanced species. They were something else entirely. Their abilities, their way of thinking, it was beyond his comprehension. And Liara, she wasn't just the diplomat he had to work with. She was the one person who could see through him completely. One evening, after a long day of discussions, Mark found himself walking alone in the palace's gardens. The quiet of the night was a welcome break from the constant buzz of diplomacy. He needed time to think, to breathe, away from the ever-present eyes of the Zelnari. As he wandered through the lush, alien landscape, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't a paranoid thought, but a certainty. Every step he took seemed to echo through the stillness, and the distant glow of the palace lights made everything feel like a dream. Mark stopped beside a large stone fountain, the water cascading down in soft, rhythmic patterns. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to clear his thoughts. His mind kept returning to the same point, Liara. It wasn't just her ability to hear everything. It was her presence, her ability to make him feel like she could unravel his deepest thoughts with just a glance. He was used to being in control, to leading conversations, to being the one who held all the cards. But with Liara, it was different. She was always one step ahead, always watching, always listening. As if summoned by his thoughts, Liara appeared from the shadows, her figure materializing like a dream. She moved with the grace of someone who was completely in tune with their surroundings, her long, dark hair flowing behind her like a river of ink. She didn't speak at first, just watched him from a distance, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Mark couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort. "Mark," she said, her voice soft but carrying an edge of something more, something he couldn't quite place. "Why are you out here alone? Shouldn't you be preparing for tomorrow's meeting?" He turned to face her, feeling his pulse quicken. "I needed some space, just a moment to think." Liara stepped closer, her presence as commanding as ever. "You're not fooling me, you know. You're not thinking about tomorrow's meeting, you're thinking about me." Mark felt his cheeks flush at the bluntness of her words. He opened his mouth to deny it, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't worry, human, I'm not upset, I'm just curious. It's not often that I find someone who can hide their thoughts so well." Mark swallowed hard. He hadn't meant to hide anything. It was just the way his mind worked, the way he had been trained. But with Liara, it felt as though his every thought was laid bare before her, as if she could see inside him without even trying. "You think I don't hear you?" she continued, her voice lilting with amusement. "You think you're being clever, keeping your thoughts to yourself. But I hear everything, Mark. I hear your doubts, your fears, your hopes. I hear the little things you try to keep hidden from everyone else." He couldn't meet her gaze. There was something unnerving about the way she spoke, as if she had known him longer than just a few days. As if she knew him better than he knew himself. "Why do you do it?" she asked softly. "Why do you try so hard to hide? I can hear your heart race when you lie, when you don't speak your truth. You don't have to keep up the facade with me, Mark." "I'm not lying," he said, his voice tighter than he intended. "I just don't want to be vulnerable." Liara's eyes softened for the first time since he'd met her. "It's not about being vulnerable, it's about trust, and trust takes time. I've heard your thoughts, your hesitation, your confusion. You're wondering if you can trust me, if you can trust anyone here. But trust doesn't work the way you think it does. It's not about making sure the other person can't hear you. It's about making sure you're willing to let them in." Mark looked up at her, his mind racing. What was she asking of him? To open up to her? To let her in? He wasn't sure if he was ready for that, not yet. "I don't know if I can do that," he said quietly. "Not yet." Liara nodded, her expression unreadable. "That's fair. But you should know that I'm not here to manipulate you, Mark. I'm not here to control you. I'm just here to help you, in my own way." Mark didn't respond immediately. There was so much he didn't understand about her, about the Zelnari, and the more he learned, the more he realized how little he knew. They weren't just advanced. They were different in a way he couldn't comprehend. And Liara, she wasn't like anyone he had ever met. She wasn't like the other diplomats he had encountered. There was an intensity to her, a depth that drew him in even though he knew he should resist. The silence stretched between them, and Mark found himself fighting the urge to reach out, to close the distance that had grown between them. But he couldn't. He had a job to do, and getting too close to Liara might cloud his judgment. Finally, Liara broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. "You're afraid, I understand that, but you can't hide from me, Mark, not forever." Mark opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, she raised a hand, stopping him. "I don't need you to explain. I already know." Her words were a cold splash of reality, and Mark felt a deep chill settle in his chest. She wasn't just hearing his thoughts, she was reading him like an open book, seeing into him in a way he couldn't escape. It was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. "Tomorrow, we meet again," Liara continued, her voice taking on a more professional tone. "We'll discuss the terms of the peace agreement. But remember, Mark, the real question isn't whether or not we can trust each other. It's whether or not you're willing to trust yourself." With that, she turned and walked away, her figure dissolving into the shadows of the garden. Mark stood there for a long time, his thoughts swirling. He had come to this planet with one mission, to secure peace between humanity and the Zelnari, but now he was faced with a far more complicated reality. The stakes weren't just political anymore, they were personal. As he made his way back to his quarters, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something far bigger than himself. The future of humanity might be at stake, but so was something else, something he couldn't put into words. Liara had opened a door to a world he hadn't known existed, and he wasn't sure whether he should step through it or walk away. But he knew one thing for sure: the path ahead wouldn't be easy. And with Liara watching, listening, and waiting, it was going to be far harder than he could have ever imagined. Mark woke up early the next morning, his mind still heavy with thoughts of Liara and everything she had said. Her words echoed in his ears. "You can't hide from me, Mark, not forever." He didn't know why they unsettled him so much, but they did. There was a truth to them, something undeniable, but also something terrifying. How could he face the truth when he wasn't even sure what it was? And more importantly, how could he navigate the mission ahead when the stakes were so much higher than he had originally thought? The peace talks were supposed to be about humanity finding its place in the galaxy. But now, after spending time with Liara and learning about the Zelnari, Mark realized there was something deeper at play. This wasn't just about treaties or alliances. This was about trust. And trust, it seemed, was a currency more valuable than anything else. Mark got dressed quickly, his mind still racing, and headed for the council hall. The air was cooler now, the twin moons overhead casting a faint glow over the palace grounds. As he approached the hall, he noticed the guards at the entrance. They didn't look at him the same way they had before. It wasn't suspicion, but something else, something that Mark couldn't quite place. The meeting was set to begin soon, and as he walked into the room, he saw Liara already seated, her presence as commanding as ever. The other Zelnari diplomats were gathered around, their silver eyes following him as he entered. There was an unsettling silence that filled the room, and Mark realized that all eyes were on him, waiting for him to make the first move. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Thank you for gathering today. I believe we're here to finalize the terms of the peace agreement between our peoples." Liara's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment it felt like the rest of the room had disappeared. She didn't speak, but the weight of her gaze made it feel as if she could read every thought in his mind. Mark swallowed, trying to focus on the task at hand. He couldn't let her distract him, not now. He had to remain professional. Liara stood slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. "Ambassador Mark," she said, her voice cool and measured, "we've heard your terms, and we have considered them carefully." She paused, letting her words settle in the air before continuing. "But there's one thing that you must understand. This peace isn't just about the treaties, it's about something much deeper." Mark felt a chill run through him. He didn't know what she meant, but he could feel the tension rising in the room. It wasn't just a negotiation anymore. It was a test, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. "Peace between our peoples requires more than just words on paper," Liara continued. "It requires understanding, and understanding requires trust. You say that humanity wishes to coexist with the Zelnari, but can you truly trust us? Can you trust me?" Mark wanted to respond, wanted to reassure her, but he found that the words wouldn't come. He had spent his life working in diplomacy, learning the art of negotiation and persuasion. But with Liara, everything was different. She wasn't interested in diplomacy in the traditional sense. She wanted something deeper, something personal. And he wasn't sure if he could give it to her. "I'm here because I believe in peace," Mark said finally, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "I'm here because I believe that humanity and the Zelnari can coexist. I'm here because I believe that we can build something greater together." Liara studied him for a long moment, her silver eyes never leaving his. "And yet, you hesitate," she said softly. "You hesitate because you don't know if you can trust us." You hesitate because you don't know if you can trust me. Mark felt his heart skip a beat. Her words were too close to the truth, and it made him uncomfortable. He had spent so much time keeping his emotions in check, keeping his thoughts guarded. But with Liara, it felt as if everything was laid bare, and it terrified him. "I'm not here to play games, Liara," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I'm here to make a deal that benefits both our peoples." Liara's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "A deal? Yes, that's what this is to you, isn't it? A transaction, but that's not how peace works. Peace isn't a transaction, it's a bond. And bonds aren't made with just words, they're made with trust." Mark took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The pressure was mounting, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it together. He had never felt so exposed in his life, but he also knew that this was the moment. The moment where he either stepped forward or stepped back. There was no middle ground. "I've heard your people's concerns," Mark said, his voice firm. "And I've made adjustments to our proposal. I believe in this peace, Liara. I believe in what we can accomplish together." "But you're right, there's more to it than just a piece of paper. There's something deeper, and I'm willing to work toward that." Liara's eyes softened, but only slightly. "Are you willing to trust me, Mark? Are you willing to trust the Zelnari with the future of your people?" The room had gone completely still. Every eye was on him, waiting for his answer. And for the first time since he had arrived, Mark realized that the future of humanity didn't rest solely on treaties or agreements. It rested on something far more fragile: trust. Mark looked at Liara, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of something human, behind her silver eyes. She wasn't just a diplomat. She was someone who understood what it meant to be vulnerable, to be afraid, to want peace but not know how to achieve it. She, too, was fighting her own battle. He could see it now, hidden beneath the layers of her alien grace. "I don't know if I can fully trust you yet," Mark said, his voice quiet but clear. "But I'm willing to try, for the sake of peace, for the sake of the future." Liara nodded slowly, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "That's all I ask, Mark. That's all I ask." The tension in the room lifted slightly, though it wasn't gone. The peace talks were far from over, but Mark felt as if something had shifted. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since arriving on Zelnara, he felt like he was finally starting to understand the true nature of the mission. It wasn't just about political negotiations. It was about something far more personal. As the meeting continued, Mark found himself listening more carefully, not just to the words being spoken, but to the underlying currents of emotion and intent. He was beginning to realize that peace wasn't something that could be signed into existence with a few words and a handshake. It had to be built piece by piece, moment by moment, and it would take more than just diplomacy. It would take trust. After the meeting ended, Mark walked out of the council hall, his mind still spinning. He was exhausted, but there was something else, something he hadn't expected. A sense of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time, he was starting to believe that it might lead to something worth fighting for. The days following the meeting were a blur for Mark. The words he had exchanged with Liara, the look in her silver eyes, and the way she had challenged him, they lingered in his mind. He couldn't escape the feeling that the mission had taken on a different weight. The stakes weren't just political anymore, they were personal. Liara's words, "Trust isn't something you can demand, it's something you must be willing to give," echoed in his thoughts constantly. She had been right, but was he ready to give it? Was he ready to trust not just her, but the entire Zelnari people? The peace talks continued, each day bringing new challenges. Mark found himself questioning everything: his approach, his beliefs, even his loyalty to humanity. He had always believed that trust was earned, but now he wondered if maybe it was something that had to be given freely, without conditions. If peace was to be achieved, then both sides would have to let go of their fears and doubts. But that was easier said than done. The night before the final summit, Mark stood alone in his quarters, staring out at the distant stars. The soft hum of the palace filled the room, a constant reminder that this was not Earth, but a world far beyond anything he had ever known. He had come here to negotiate, to secure humanity's future, but he was starting to wonder if the true challenge wasn't the Zelnari. It was himself. How could he ask for something as important as peace if he couldn't even trust the very people he was negotiating with? The door to his quarters opened with a soft click, and Mark turned to find Liara standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him silently. Her presence filled the room, and for a moment the weight of the mission seemed to lift, if only for a brief moment. She didn't look like a diplomat then. She looked like something else, something more personal, more real. "I thought you might be here," she said finally, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I wanted to talk to you before tomorrow." Mark didn't know what to say. He had expected her to approach him with the same cool, calculating demeanor she always had. But now there was a vulnerability in her voice that he hadn't heard before. He motioned to the chair across from him. "Please sit." Liara stepped into the room and took a seat, her gaze never leaving his. There was something different in the way she looked at him now, as if the walls between them had started to crumble. The silence stretched for a moment before she spoke again. "I know this mission is difficult for you," she said, her voice low. "I know you're struggling with trust, but you're not the only one." Mark raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Liara's gaze softened, and for the first time since they had met, she looked unsure. "You think that I have it all figured out, that I know exactly what to do. But I don't. I'm just as uncertain as you are. I've spent my whole life hearing everything, knowing everything about everyone. But it's never been enough. The one thing I've never been able to hear, truly hear, is trust. I've never been able to understand why people give it so freely, why they risk it." Mark felt his chest tighten. He had never considered that. He had always seen Liara as someone who had everything under control, someone who was always one step ahead. But now he realized that she too was navigating uncharted territory. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice soft. "What does it have to do with us?" She looked down at her hands, her fingers clasped tightly together. "Because I want you to know that I understand. I understand your fear, your hesitation. And I want you to know that it's okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to doubt. But the truth is, Mark, if we're going to move forward, if we're going to build something real, we both have to let go. We both have to trust." Mark didn't know how to respond. Her words resonated with him in ways he didn't expect. He had been so focused on the politics of the situation, the mission itself, that he hadn't stopped to consider what it would take on a personal level. This wasn't just about treaties. It was about two people, two species coming together and saying, "We're willing to trust each other." "I'm not sure I can do it," Mark admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet. It's not just about the Zelnari, Liara. It's about everything I've been trained to believe. Everything I've been taught about power and control. It's hard to just let go." Liara's gaze softened even more, and for a moment Mark thought he saw a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "I know," she said, "but trust isn't about control, it's about vulnerability. It's about saying, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to try. And I'm willing to try, Mark. Are you?" For a long time, Mark didn't say anything. He couldn't. The weight of her words, the sincerity in her voice, it was too much. He had spent his entire life building walls around himself, walls of duty, of logic, of control. He had never allowed himself to truly feel, to truly trust. But now, standing here with Liara, he realized that maybe that was the only way forward. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Mark nodded. "I'll try. For the peace, for the future, I'll try." Liara's smile was small but genuine. She didn't say anything more, but her eyes shone with something, something that wasn't just about diplomacy. It was something personal, something human. The next morning, the final summit began. The atmosphere in the council hall was different, charged with a quiet intensity. Both sides had come to the table with their final proposals, but Mark knew that today wasn't just about what was written on the papers. It was about something far deeper, the trust that had been built, the understanding that had been reached, and the willingness to move forward despite the fear and uncertainty. As the meeting progressed, Mark found himself speaking not just for humanity, but for himself. His voice was steady, his words confident, but there was something else there too, a vulnerability, a willingness to open up and be honest. And when it came time to finalize the terms of the peace agreement, Mark extended his hand to Liara. She took it without hesitation, and for the first time he felt as if they were both on the same level, not as negotiators, but as equals. The peace agreement was signed, but the true victory, Mark realized, was something more intangible. It was the trust that had been forged between two very different people. Trust that had come not from power or control, but from vulnerability and understanding. It was a hard-fought battle, but in the end, it was worth it. As the ceremony concluded, Liara stepped closer to Mark, her silver eyes meeting his. "You did it," she said quietly. "You trusted me." Mark smiled, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in his gaze. I'm still learning, Liara, but I think I'm ready to keep trying. And for the first time since arriving on Zelnara, Mark truly believed it.